Welcome to step 0 of jumping into chess. If you have played chess before and you understand the rules, then you can skip this video. This is for somebody who has never played, never seen, doesn't understand anything about how chess works. We're going to be doing a very basic setup of the board and the pieces and the rules as to how they all move. So the first thing is that no matter which side of the board you're on, the white corner goes on your right side. Then from the outside in, we have our rooks, the castle-shaped piece, and the rook can move vertically or horizontally as far as it can go. Now, if there's a piece in its way, it will have to stop and take it, but that's how that piece moves. And these are called horizontally ranks. So this is the first rank. We see our number 1 here. And this is the file. So this is the A file. So they can go as far as they want on the rank or the file. Then next we have our knights. And the knights can be tricky for beginners to see how they work. So the knight moves 2 spaces in any direction, 2 spaces, not diagonally. And then at the end it can go up. For instance, if I move horizontally, then it can go up or down 1 space. If I move 2 spaces vertically, it can move left or right 1 space. So this knight here can move to any of these squares. The knight can also jump over other pieces, and it's the only piece that can do so. Next we have our bishops. And the bishops are similar to the rooks in that they can move as far as they want, but they instead move diagonally. So this bishop here would be called our light squared bishop. Our dark squared bishop, because they only move diagonally. They only ever stay on one color. Every other piece can change colors, but the bishops will always be on the color they started on. So this bishop here currently can move to any of these squares. And the bishops are talked about as being on a diagonal. So right now this one is on the A3 to C1 diagonal, and also the C1 to H6 diagonal. Now, if you just want to know how to play, maybe play with your friends or your parents or people you know, you don't have to worry about learning the grid system, the A1, C3, the coordinate system. But if you really want to study chess and you want to maybe play in tournaments or try to really excel at the game, it's very important to learn this system. And so I'll be using it just as a way to help you get comfortable with it. Next, we have our queens. And the queens are always on their color. So when you're on the white side, the queen is on the left. When you're on the black side, the queen is on your right. And the queen is a combination of the rook and the bishop. So you can see that the queen, if I could do this correctly, the queen can move more spaces than any other piece and is therefore your most powerful attacking piece. So it can go as far as it wants horizontally, vertically, or diagonally on a rank, a file, or a diagonal. Finally, the king can move 1 space. Moves just like the queen, but can only move 1 space any of these directions. So your king is not a powerful attacking piece, but it's your most valuable piece, because if it gets captured, you lose the game. So the goal is to use your pieces together to pin down and trap the enemy king. After that, we have a row of pawns on each side. And the pawns are second to the knight as far as the weirdest pieces for beginners to get used to, because they have a few different odd rules as to how they move. So on the first move of each of the pawns, and on the first move only, they can move 2 spaces. You can also just choose to move 1 or 2. Every move after that, though, even if you move 1 on the first one, they can only ever move 1. So that's your first weird rule. The second is that every other piece moves and captures in the same way. So if my queen wants to capture this pawn, it just moves into it and takes it. But if my pawn runs into this pawn, it now cannot move. It's stuck here. It can capture diagonally, but it cannot capture forward. So it can't move diagonally on its own. It can only move forward, but then it has to capture diagonally. So your row of pawns is kind of like a wall or a fence, and you are trying to break through the other person's fence without letting them break through yours. At the end of the game, this often turns into something like this, where you have one pawn that has broken through and gets to the other side. So another weird rule with a pawn is that if your pawn makes it all the way to the other end of the board, you can take the pawn off and replace it with a piece. So these are pawns and these are pieces, and they're different. The knight and the bishop are considered minor pieces, and the rook and the queen are considered major pieces because they're more powerful. You can't turn your pawn into another king, by the way. So usually if you get your pawn all the way to the other end and turn it into a piece, usually you'll turn it into another queen because it's the most powerful. But sometimes you'll want a knight or, based on the situation, something else. But usually it turns into a queen. The final weird rule when it comes to the pawns is this move called en passant, which is French for in passing. So it lets you capture a pawn in passing. Now it only happens if you have a pawn on the 5th rank, because this pawn could now capture either of these squares. If the black player chooses to move their pawn 2 squares, which they can do on the first time it moves, they jump over this square that your pawn was guarding. On the next move, and on the next move only, you can choose to take on this square, as if the black pawn had only moved 1 square and your pawn was here. You could choose to take it. Even though they chose to move 2 squares, you can take it as if they only moved 1. An odd rule, you may not see it a lot early on, but it is very important for your pawn game at the end. The final weird rule that may not make any sense is called castling, and it's a way to get your king to safety. If you have empty squares between your king and your rook on either side, and your king has never moved, and your king is not currently being attacked, you can castle. And what that means is you move your king 2 squares towards your rook in the corner, and then your rook comes to the other side. This is an extremely good move. We'll talk about why later, but it's a weird rule as far as there's no other movement that is even close to it where you can move 2 pieces in the same turn. So you can do this on either side. All of those rules just have to be true. There have to be no pieces in the way. So you'd have to move all your pieces out of the way first. And then you move your king 2 squares towards the rook, and then the rook comes to the other side. That's it. That's all of the rules on how to play, how to set up the game, and how to move your pieces. Next, we'll look at how to actually use them.